This is Bruno from Spanguru.es, and this is the free Spanish non-lucrative visa webinar. Today is May 7th, 2025. And as you know, we're going to do a presentation, and then it's going to be a Q&A session for people who haven't joined earlier. You can ask your questions anytime using your chat box in the bottom right corner of your screen. Make sure to add a question mark so it's easy for me to see your questions at the end. But first, we're going to go through a presentation, and the way that I have structured this presentation is a timeline before the application, during the application, and after the approval. We're going to go through some important definitions, how consulates work, third-party services like BLS, different immigration status, entering Spain as tourist, and becoming a resident using a visa, tax considerations, a few slides about taxes, I think it's important, NLV eligibility requirements as well, documentation. We're going to go through all of them, each one of them, or at least the most important ones. And during the application, we're going to look at timing. I have added some new slides to make it even easier to understand how the process looks like. So this is going to be a novelty today. And we're going to go through the application process. What comes first? The most difficult things, the easier things, validity periods, and after the approval, arrival in Spain, renewal process, long-term residence after 5 years, citizenship, Spanish passport, and potentially some pathways to transition to work permit. A disclaimer here, the content of this webinar is for information purposes only and is not legal advice. The requirements listed here are not official. Please check your specific consulate requirements and BLS offices if applies. A little bit about Spainguru. Our objective is facilitating the relocation process for English-speaking foreigners to Spain since 2014. We have pretty nice reviews out there. Just search Spainguru reviews and you will see that you are in good hands. Spanguru is a great tool if you're planning to move to Spain because you can use Spanguru for absolutely free. There's so many free resources on Spanguru.es. You can join our weekly newsletter on Mondays where I feature the top discussions on social media about anything related to moving to Spain. I publish one video per Labor Day. So I have almost 900 videos on Spanguru's YouTube channel. It's all absolutely free. Blog with 1,700 articles plus, half of them about non-lucrative visa. And as we said, the most important probably, the Spanguru's community. Several Facebook groups with an aggregated total of 140,000 members with a dedicated non-lucrative visa group, now at 20,000 members recently, and the biggest group out there for the non-lucrative visa. But also you can use Spanguru to find personally vetted professionals by me. Most of them, I have used them for myself. I have obtained my Spanish nationality using the professionals that I recommend, one of them. And you can find immigration experts absolutely knowledgeable of non-lucrative visa process in consulates in the USA, UK, Canada, Australia, and many more places. So it's important to have specific experience in each consulate because they are so different. And tax advisors, financial planners. It's important to have synchronize those two things, immigration and taxes, before even taking the decision before moving to Spain, and all the auxiliary services that you will need for your visa application, like NLV compliant health insurances, medical certificates, sworn translations, Apostilles services in US and the UK, and complementary services like bank accounts, money transfer services, and so much more than 100 vetted services for you. But enough about Spanguru.es, and let's move to before the application. Now, what is the Spanish non-lucrative visa? This is a Spanish visa for non-EU citizens who can financially support themselves and who don't need to work in Spain. There are basically one law and one regulation of the law that define this Spanish visa. The main law is the Ley Orgánica 4/2000, and the regulation of the law, which is about to change. Actually, effective on May 20th, 2025, the new regulation takes effect. This new regulation was passed on November 19th, 2024, and has introduced a few changes that affect the Spanish non-lucrative visa. We're going to look at those later on. Now, the first thing is that you find your specific consulate that serves the area where you live legally, because that's where you apply for the Spanish non-lucrative visa. You can find all those consulates and their areas on Spanguru.es/Spain non-lucrative visa. And I have all the consulates in the US, UK, Canada, and Australia, and each one of them has a dedicated page with all the relevant links you need to the official requirements. And I also aggregate the content for each one of those consulates. For example, New York, if you go to the New York page for the Spanish non-lucrative visa, New York page on Spanguru.es, you will find all the first-hand experiences from Spanguru community members who share their experience at that specific consulate, giving tricks and tips for your applications. Of course, that's not legal advice. It's just based on personal experience, but I'm sure it is extremely helpful for you to read them. Now, most of consulates work with an outsourced service that processes the Spanish non-lucrative visa. In the UK, all the consulates use BLS International. This is an Indian company that is in the Indian Stock Exchange with operations in 64 countries. It is a huge company. And most of the consulates in the US also use BLS International for NOV processing. Recently, the Los Angeles and San Francisco consulates started using it. Miami uses it. New York City doesn't use it yet, for example. So it's important that you understand if your consulate uses BLS International. In the UK, all of them use it. Now, as you probably know, as a British or US citizen or Canada or Australia, you don't need a Schengen visa to enter Spain as a tourist, where you can remain for up to 90 days for every 6-month rolling period. Okay, this is the also known 90-day in a 180-day rule. Some nationalities will require a Schengen visa to enter the Schengen space. The Schengen space or Schengen area is a group of 28 European countries that is internally borderless. Now, if you intend to stay in any of those countries, including Spain, for more than 90 days in a 180-day period, you will need to secure a visa. Now, specifically about Spain, the non-lucrative visa is considered to be a temporary visa because it will grant you the possibility to stay in Spain for up to 5 years under the residence linked to it. Now, what is the difference between a visa and a residence? We tend to call everything non-lucrative visa, even the residence. But really the visa, it's only the paper that is stick to your passport that has a validity period of just 3 months. After that, the visa itself expires. What you have to obtain is the non-lucrative residence tied to your visa, right? So when you enter Spain, you have officially up to 30 days to obtain your tarjeta de identidad de extranjero, which is your residency card. And then you will be under the non-lucrative residence, okay? So that's the difference. Citizens from EU countries and associated countries like Switzerland, Norway, etc., as well as their spouses, are exempt from obtaining this kind of visa. Therefore, if you are one EU passport holder or you're married to a EU passport holder, you don't need to apply for the non-lucrative visa. In such case, it is much easier to stay in Spain. You have actually the right to do so as long as you comply with certain requirements, but those requirements will be much easier than the non-lucrative visa. You have to show less money if you don't plan to work. You're going to obtain a permit for up to 5 years without renewal processes in between those 5 years, and it will include a work permit, logically, right? But unfortunately, if you're a non-EU passport holder, you will have to obtain a visa in order to stay longer than 90 days. In this case, the non-lucrative visa is a temporary visa, right? Now, let's go back. Let's go to taxes. Let's talk a little bit about taxes. And as I said, it's important that you align your taxes and your immigration possibilities to make sure that you don't make any mistake when you come to Spain, or you don't get any unwanted surprises. So let's talk a little bit about taxes. The most important concept here is tax residency, right? So you will become a tax resident in Spain if you spend over 183 days in Spain within a calendar year, okay? That is from January 1st to December 31st. Those days don't need to be consecutive, and it doesn't matter your immigration status. For example, if you arrive on July 2nd and you spend every single day until the end of the year, you will be spending 182 days that year. Therefore, you are not becoming a tax resident that particular year. But if you happened to have arrived to Spain on a scouting trip as a tourist at the beginning of the year, and you stay 10 days, then you have to add up those 10 days too. So you would have stayed 192 days. Therefore, you would become a Spanish tax resident. Okay, so that's very important. And you will become a tax resident in a way retroactively until January 1st, that very same year. Therefore, any taxable event happening from January 1st could be liable of taxes in Spain. Then there are two other conditions. Your main economic activity or primary income source is in Spain, regardless of time spent in the country, and or if your spouse or children live in Spain, because the tax authorities could consider that your center of interest is in Spain. Okay, so any of these conditions, if any of these conditions apply, Okay, you could be considered to be a tax resident, therefore making you liable for paying taxes on your worldwide income and potentially on the net value of your assets via the wealth tax and solidarity tax. So very quick summary about taxes. There is the income tax with progressive tax rates depending on the on your income volume. Form 720, you will have to declare foreign assets, so assets and rights held abroad outside of Spain. You will have to potentially declare wealth tax and file wealth tax depending on which region where you live in Spain. There are 17 regions. This is a regional tax. Potentially solidarity tax that kicks in at a much higher threshold, 3 million euros plus. But we can be thankful because there are double taxation agreements that avoid double taxation between the USA, UK, Canada, and Australia. That will avoid you from being taxed twice for the same thing. But of course, Spanish taxes tend to be higher, at least from the US and the UK. So even if you're not taxed twice, potentially, if you pay taxes in Spain, you will be paying higher taxes than in your origin country, right? It's very important that the regional rules vary significantly. So it's extremely important that you consult with a tax professional, which you can find on Spanguru.es. And this is just $1 million question and just a round number because a lot of people get very scared about Spanish taxes. Just to give you a round number, if you make 100,000 euros per year of taxable income, people say, oh, I'm going to be paying 45% of income tax. It doesn't work like that. Even if you check the table on the right, the fifth tax bracket for incomes between 60,000 and 300,000 is really 45%. But the way it works is that you are paying 19% income tax for the first 12,400 euros that you make. Then you pay 24% income tax for the next bracket until you reach your income. Therefore, the effective tax rate for 100K income is 36%. It's not 45%. Still, it's not low, but it's not crazy 45%. And here you can see a table. These are round numbers without allowances or deductions, just for your information purposes only, how much effective tax rate you will pay on your income for the different income amounts. For example, from 30,000 euros per year, 24% effective tax rate, up to 36% for 100K income. If you want to know more, you can watch and join my Spanish taxes webinar. I had it yesterday. I just uploaded a recording, but of course, there is a Q&A session at the end for people who attend it in person. Now, let's go back to the non-lucrative visa. Let's go through the documentation. This is a summary. Of course, always check the official requirements. They will ask you for an address in Spain. And depending, depending on the consulate, they're going to have different interpretations of what that means. Most of consulates, it's enough to say to which province you plan to move to. But some consulates, like, for example, Chicago or Boston, they will require a rental contract in advance. So this is, of course, a very extreme interpretation of the rules. And I have asked this to Ainhoa Manero from Sterna Abogados, a top immigration lawyer, who said, you can watch the video, that she always fights this with these consulates and she always wins, because it's absolutely crazy that they ask to someone who hasn't been in Spain to show a rental contract in advance. But of course, a lot of people, in order to avoid friction, to avoid problems, they comply with this crazy requirement from certain consulates, and they will find an Airbnb for 3 months or 6 months, or other platforms like Spotahome or even Idealista, or through realtors, taking risks, of course, to rent, from abroad. So this is the story about the first thing, about the address in Spain. Now, address in the country of residence. That is, you have to prove that you are a legal resident within the area that your consulate is serving. So that consulate is the right consulate for you to apply for the Spanish non-lucrative visa. Prove sufficient financial means to support yourself and dependents without working. Have comprehensive health insurance from a company authorized to operate in Spain. Or if you're a UK retiree, you can use instead an S1 form that will grant you access to the public healthcare system in Spain instead of showing a private health insurance. You have to show a clean criminal background check. Medical certificate has nothing to do with the health insurance. And if you plan to go with spouses and children, you will have to show new marriage certificates, birth certificates. You have to prove that you're not going to engage in any work or professional activities in Spain, and potentially also submit a letter of intent. And as we said, depending how you're moving, potentially they will ask you for school enrollment for your kids, as we said, rental contracts, stuff like that, photos, fees payment, etc., etc. Okay, this is a summary. We're going to go through in depth into each one of them. If you want to watch an interview that I did to Ainhoa Manero, top immigration expert, I asked her 55 frequently asked questions about the Spanish non-lucrative visa that I highly recommend you watching this video, because it really, like, I took the most asked questions after 3 years reviewing the Spanish non-lucrative visa Facebook group, and I asked this to a top professional, and she gave us all the answers that we wanted to hear. Now, let's go through the financial requirements in 2025. Okay, so you have to show proof of sufficient funds, how much money you need to show, and this could be including savings and or regular passive income. Okay, so the main applicant needs to show 400% of the IPREM index, okay, which is an index that is published every year. And there it says 2024 because it has remained the same in 2024 and in 2025, hasn't changed. Each dependent needs to show 100% of the IPREM index, okay? That translated into euros, the minimum financial threshold for the main applicant is 28,800 euros plus 7,200 euros for a dependent. If you look on the chart in the right, in the table, a couple would then be 28,800 euros plus 7,200 euros, total 36,000 euros. That's the minimum threshold. It can be savings and a combination, okay, or passive income, okay? Pension withdrawals, rental income, but be careful with rental income because it is not accepted all the time. Also dividends, etc. Okay, you will have to show bank statements, different periods. Some consulates or BLS offices ask for 3 months, some other 6 months, some other 12 months, and documentation from your bank wherever you have your money. In this case, US and the UK, for example, right? But then when we say documentation, sometimes people have investment accounts that are readily accessible, and this could potentially count too if you show documentation proving that it is readily accessible, immediately accessible, without any penalties. That could potentially also count for your funding proof. Some consulates will also ask for tax returns, especially if you plan to bring dependent people, but not only. And you will need something to keep in mind: double the amount for the renewal. And there are regional variations, okay? Not all the regions ask for double the amount. And it is also not really double the amount in a year, but because you will have to renew for 2 years period, you will have to prove that you have the funding to live those 2 years. Therefore, you have to prove double the amount, but in 2 years. So if you have passive income, that passive income will count as twice, let's say. We'll look at that in a use case scenario. Going back to what the IPREM index is, you can see there the progression each year went up. And this is something that you have to plan accordingly because it can go up anytime, like any given year, right? The IPREM index is an index that is published in the, let's say, national budget, and there has to be political agreement. But since there's no political agreement at the moment, it's just stayed frozen in time. But it could happen that in 2026, it goes up to 650 euros per month instead of the current 600 euros. Therefore, the main applicant needs to prove 31,200 euros. That is almost 3,000 euros more, okay? And dependents, 7,800 euros, okay? So if you obtain the visa now, but then in the future the IPREM goes up, when you do the renewals, they will be on the updated IPREM index. So consider that it will go up potentially, okay? Now, $1 million question. Can I work remotely for non-Spanish companies? Okay, so it is a very controversial question, but I'm going to tell you what I know Manero from Stern Abogados says. So I'm quoting a professional, okay, and I will also share my personal experience. You cannot work for a Spanish company under a non-lucrative visa, but you definitely can work remotely. You can for non-Spanish companies under the non-lucrative visa. It is a gray area. It is not prohibited. It is not permitted, okay? But in fact, there is a Supreme Court ruling that actually permitted it, let's say, or at least says that the non-lucrative residence doesn't prohibit it, okay? So it is very defensible that you do it, okay? But of course, if you create the slightest doubt that you pretend to work when you're applying for the non-lucrative visa at a Spanish consulate, you will be denied ipso facto, okay? What I'm talking is about once you apply for the non-lucrative visa, once you are in Spain under the non-lucrative visa with your passive income, with your savings and everything, and you're working remotely under the Spanish non-lucrative visa, nothing happens. Once you become a tax resident in Spain, you pay your taxes on your worldwide income, you disclose that income. Spanish tax authorities are happy to charge you taxes. You will not pay Social Security, okay? You will have your private health insurance, right? and nothing happens. There's no connection between the immigration authorities and the Spanish taxes. And in fact, I know people, and if you go on YouTube, you will see several influencers out there on Spanish non-lucrative visa who are working and getting money from promotions, etc., etc. Okay, so that is the situation today. Please watch the video where I asked this to Ainhoa Manero. There's your QR code, or just send me an email and send you the link. It is a short video of 30 seconds. And this is the situation today. And of course, I'm not recommending you to do it. Definitely no, don't do it. There is now at the Spanish, the digital nomad visa, maybe that is more suitable for working remotely from Spain, but I convey you the truth of the legal situation, okay, that there is today. Because the non-lucrative visa was created when remote work wasn't a thing, really. So the legislators didn't have this figure in mind. And just to give you a little bit more about this, and also enhancing the idea on how big the differences are among the different consulates, Edinburgh, for example, officially permits people to work and still obtain the Spanish non-lucrative visa as long as the work has specific characteristics. And here's a person, in the Spanish community member, who obtained the non-lucrative visa with the husband, going back every month to work at an oil rig in the Northern Sea. And also, I know immigration lawyers who have obtained non-lucrative visas for people with this kind of works, like pilots, for example, people who go back every month to USA and work for a period as pilots, and then go back to Spain under the non-lucrative visa. Okay, so if you are in this situation, you should check with a professional, because it is not true, not entirely true, the thing about that you cannot work under any circumstance with a non-lucrative residence. Okay, so check with a professional, because you could be all right. Now, let's move to private health insurance requirements. Unless you are a UK retiree that you can use the S1 form, you will have to obtain a private health insurance from companies that are authorized to operate in Spain. Now, not every policy is compliant, and the conditions for compliance are, first of all, it cannot have any co-payments, and I add here reimbursements. Okay, because reimbursements, if you check at some consulates, for example, Houston, they also mention reimbursements. That means you go to see a doctor, you pay for the doctor, okay, and then you pass the invoice to your company and you get the money back. This is gray area, but it is also source of problems and potential frictions and potential denial. So make sure that your health insurance doesn't have reimbursement clauses. That's my recommendation. You can always take the risk, and some people have been approved, but some others been denied. So be careful with that. Second condition, no waiting periods, right? So you need to be covered from moment zero, which you set foot in Spain. Full coverage, geographical coverage, you have to be covered all over Spain, and you will have to be covered for every specialty or every type of medicine, okay, with nuances here. And we're going to talk about that. Normally, we have to pay a full year in advance, because companies will require the full payment in order to supply you with the certificate of coverage in Spanish with the right wording. And this is a necessary document for the Spanish non-lucrative visa application. Now, let's go to the frequently asked questions. Are my medicines covered? No, you will have to pay retail price. And also, if after 1 year of residence in Spain, you use the Convenio Especial to enter the Spanish public healthcare system, you also will have to pay for your medicines cost. What should be the health insurance start date? This is also $1 million question. Now, what I usually tell people is, if you plan to move on June 15th, for example, if you start the health insurance on June 1st, usually they start on the first day of any given month, then you should be all right, okay? Some people say, oh, but my lawyer told me to have it started already by the time of the appointment. Some people say that. I don't think it is correct. So normally you should calculate when you intend to enter Spain and be covered the same month in which you will enter Spain. Of course, you have to look at the timings, how long the visas are being processed, and do a little calculation. The best is to go with professionals who know about all this, who can recommend you the best starting date. Are there health insurances for older than 75 years of age? Yes, they are out there. Yes, but they're quite expensive, unfortunately, and not every company has NLV compliant health insurances for after these years of age. What if I have pre-existing conditions? So I'm going to circle back to the full coverage condition, okay? It will depend how severe those pre-existing conditions are. Okay. For example, if you had cancer in the last 5 years, you'll probably, unfortunately, won't get private health insurance coverage. Okay. But if you've been in remission, okay, more than 5 years, then you are able to obtain your coverage for the NLV. For example, if you have common pre-existing conditions like high blood pressure, stuff like that, usually your health insurance will include an exclusion or will exclude your existing conditions, but still will be able to issue the certificate of coverage with the correct wording in order for you to obtain the non-lucrative visa. However, once you move to Spain and you have any problem related to those pre-existing conditions, you will have to pay everything out of your pocket. Potentially, entering the public healthcare system after 1 year of residence, that could be a solution, let's say, because once you enter the public healthcare system, your pre-existing conditions will be covered. Not the medicines, but the treatment, okay? So that is the situation about the pre-existing conditions. Can I pay into the Spanish public health system? As we said, yes, after 1 year of residence, it will cost you 60 euros per month if you're younger than 65, and 157 euros per month after 65 years of age. I understand that Catalonia is free. Can I use my current health insurance from the UK, USA? Short answer is, if it's compliant for NLV, yes, of course. But the long answer is, I highly don't recommend it. It's going to be expensive. It's going to be difficult for you to obtain the certificate of coverage in Spanish with the correct wording. You have to storm translate it. It could be that there are reimbursement or copayment clauses in the conditions, and that could be a source of friction and potentially denial. And usually the Spanish companies are much cheaper. So it's not going to be a hard decision to get your Spanish coverage that you are sure that is compliant. So yes, long story short, I highly recommend using the Spanish companies. Can I apply with the UK S1 form if I am a UK retiree? Yes, as we said. Do I need a Spanish bank account? So no, you don't need a Spanish bank account in order to hire a non-lucrative visa compliant health insurance policy. If you happen to have one, potentially that could be in your favor, because in that case, potentially you could pay on a monthly basis and still get your certificate of coverage in Spanish for the NLV application, okay? But definitely it's not a condition. Can I pay on a monthly basis? As I said, usually you will require to have a Spanish IBAN account, usually. But it's something to discuss with your broker, exclusive agent, or directly with the company. Usually it's not the case. You have to pay the full thing in advance. Can there be reimbursements? We talked about it. I say usually not. Some consulates verbally prohibit it, and some others, depending on the officer reviewing your paperwork, they will not like to see reimbursements in your policy. Will I get a refund if I'm denied? That depends on the policy that you have signed. Make sure to discuss and understand exactly every condition of your policy. Read the conditions, read all the articles, analyze them, and discuss what would happen in the event of being denied of your visa. Will you get a full refund, a partial refund? Will you have to prove that your visa was denied with a letter from the consulate? Would you have to prove that the visa was denied because of the health insurance itself? So be careful with that. My recommendations on Spanguru, usually they provide a full refund regardless of the reason of your visa denial, just with a letter saying that you've been denied. Okay, but it will depend on each company and on each policy what you're signing. What are the top companies? Now let's talk about it. Here you have Adelas, ASA, Sanitas, Asisa, Salus, AXA, DKV, Caser, Mafre, and many more. All these companies are good companies, okay? All of them. If you go to Trustpilot, they have low rates, unfortunately, like IKEA that has 1.4, or like Airbnb that has 2.3 out of 5. These are huge companies who don't do any effort in gathering good reviews like I do on Spainguru. They don't really care about the reviews online. But I have personally used Adelas. It's a good company. Now I use Mafre because I had a job before that gave me this coverage, okay, including my salary, and I just decided to stay there, okay? So I don't see any difference in the coverage or in how they work. They're generally good. I'm generally happy with any of these companies. I'm sure all the other ones are good too. But if size matters, you can see that Adeslas has more than a quarter of the Spanish market, and it is double the size of Sanitas and Asisa, which are the seconds, okay? Second and third, and then you have the KV and so on and so on. Roughly 26% of the population in Spain has also private coverage, okay? And the best, if you can, is to combine the two, public and private, because public, you can see specialists very quickly without any intermediaries, and you can get your interventions very quickly. whereas public system is also very good for extreme situations or emergency, but it's quite slow and there are longer waiting times for seeing specialists. Now, there's been some controversy because some BLS office was trying to promote a travel health insurance. This is the case of Washington, D.C., but not the only one. And this must be a mistake, a misleading mistake from BLS. And actually, themselves, they say that travel health insurance, and also the consulate states it, that travel health insurance will not be accepted for the Spanish non-lucrative visa. So try not to pay attention to that bad mistake from BLS, okay? Now, if you need someone that knows their job and their deal and what you're going through, I highly recommend you going with Carlos Blanco, exclusive agent of Adeslas, who's an immigration lawyer who knows everything, the ins and outs of the non-lucrative visa. There's no extra cost to you, no extra cost to require a quote from him or using his services if you end up buying, okay? And has the possibility to extend the start date almost indefinitely, okay? Several months in advance, so you won't have any stress out of it. So I highly recommend, I'm linking my reputation out there to Carlos because I know he's an excellent professional who I have been recommending for at least 3 years with excellent reviews. So definitely worth having a look to what he's offering. And actually 3 hours ago, someone on the NLB group posted an excellent review about Carlos that you can, if you join the group, you can read this personal experience using him. So yes, you're in good hands. And then we move to the medical certificate. Now, as I said, it has nothing to do with health insurance policy. It's a different document that has to be signed by a doctor, okay? And depending where you are, US and UK, for example, there are different pathways, okay? It has a 3-month validity. So when you submit your documents, this document has to be valid, okay? And has to have the right wording. For that, each consulate provides a template with the wording. Some consulates provide a template only in English, some other consulates in English and in Spanish in the same page, okay? The advantage of using the one with 2 languages is that if the doctor signs also the Spanish part, also is important, not just the English part, you will avoid doing the sworn translation, which costs about 40 euros. So try to get the double language template. Make sure to get a signature, stamp, wet ink stamp from the doctor, and print it with the letterhead, make it look official, and this would work. Now, in the UK, there is the extra requirement of obtaining an apostille for these documents, okay? And for that, the doctor needs to be FCDO registered at the Foreign Office, which normally they can register in 24 hours, but not every doctor wants to do it. If you want to solve this problem, Spainguru, you can find online service called SumDoc with a discount who uses FCDO registered doctors, and it's all fully online. Okay, and if, as I said, if it's only in English, you will have to sworn translate. You can also find sworn translators on Spanguru. You can also use, alternatively, a Spanish doctor, which has several advantages, and there is a disadvantage, I will tell you. The advantages is that the Spanish doctor is fully online. You don't have to sworn translate it. You don't have to apostille it. But somewhat recently, some consulates required, out of nowhere, that you have to be physically present in Spain at the time of issue of your certificate. Okay, this is the case of Manchester, and I've heard also Lisbon and San Francisco have this requirement. So if you don't have other alternatives, or if you want to use a Spanish doctor, you can contact one on Spanguru.es. You fill the form, you say which consulate you're applying from, and the doctor will tell you if his certificate is accepted at that consulate. But for example, London and Edinburgh are accepting this consulate, Singapore and Miami. Many consulates accept the Spanish doctor certificate, even if you're not physically present in Spain when it was issued. Frequently asked question. My doctor won't sign the medical certificate template. What can I do? First, change doctor. Alternatively, use the Spanish doctor if you can't find a doctor. People in the US say that emergency care rooms, you just go there and maybe they sign them, okay? My doctor is not FCDO registered. Is his certificate valid? No, because you will need to obtain the apostille. How do I know the Spanish doctor certificate is accepted in my consulate? Ask directly to the doctor by filling the form on Spanguru.es. And here's a table that summarizes what I said, okay? So, just to point out something that just happened in the USA, someone said that it was required in Chicago consulate, this is absolutely crazy and never heard of, to apostille the medical certificate in Chicago, okay? And this person has had to notarize the certificate in Chicago and then obtain an apostille on the notarization of the certificate and could supply this document. This is something, an outlier, something absolutely exceptional that I don't know if it's going to be repeated in time. But since you're attending this Spanguru webinar, I tell you the ins and outs of what's going on. Clean criminal background check. All right, so this is usually the document that takes the longest to obtain. We're going to see the charts later on so you understand the timings. It must be squeaky clean for the last 5 years. And if you've been living in other countries in the last 5 years, you need to provide also the police checks of those countries where you were legal residents. In the UK, it's called the ACRO, and you will need to apostille it and sworn translate it, and it has usually a 6-month validity. In the US, it's the FBI background check that requires a federal apostille and sworn translation. All right, usually has also a 6-month validity. Am I still eligible with records on my background check? If there are small records like misdemeanors, stuff like that, smoking pot when you were 25, several decades ago, driving under the influence, stuff like that, it should be fine. But if you have serious crimes with conviction sentences, stuff like that, it could be a denial. So if you are in this situation, always go with a lawyer, okay? What the lawyers do is to check whether that record would be deleted in Spanish law and prove that the same record in your country should be deleted if it wasn't, and make the case for that so that that record wouldn't count. Okay. Am I still eligible with a no live trace in the UK? Yes, you could be, but you will be requested an extra report that states exactly which type of record is under that no live trace record. Can I expedite the background check federal apostille? Not really. It is taking now 5 to 6 weeks to get the apostille, but if you use that's if you do it directly at the Department of State in Washington, D.C., which is quite affordable, but takes quite some time. If you use private apostille services, like the ones I recommend on Spanguru.es, it could take 2 to 3 weeks. So half the time. But of course, it's going to be a bit more expensive. Now, can I notarize the background check and use state apostille instead? No, people did this in the past with different results, but definitely now it's a denial. Always use federal apostille for your FBI background check. Where can I have my fingerprints taken? There's basically 2 options. You can use a cardboard, a specific form where you put your fingerprints with ink and you send it by snail mail to the FBI, or you go to US post offices and they take your fingerprints, or to channelers, okay, like IdentGo, stuff like that, and you send, they scan your fingerprints and you send them, and you usually get the electronic version of the FBI within an hour, and that's pretty fast. What it takes long is to obtain the apostille, and then you will have to translate it. What if my fingerprints are illegible? Well, potentially using channelers could help. If you send me an email to hello@spanguru.es, I can send you the links. And here's some screenshots from Spainguru community members talking about their experiences with the police checks. In this case, for the UK, now the ACRO is taking 5 to 6 weeks. This is for in the last 2 weeks. So this is what it's taking. So you always have to plan accordingly. In Canada, it's taking very little time. And now there is no problems obtaining the apostille, which used to take months, but now apparently it's going pretty fast. Proof of not working. So as we said, this visa is also called the retirement visa, okay? Because usually these people who come to Spain to retire, but not necessarily, okay? Some people take sabbatical years. Some people are working until the very last moment, and they don't want to quit their jobs unless their visa are granted. But if you are in the retirement situation, the best is showing a proof of receipt of a pension that make it clear that you won't work. If you're still working, many consulates will require you to quit and submit a P45 in the UK. In the US, a resignation letter, termination letter from employer, both translated and notarized. And if you were freelancers, in the US, notarized affidavit promising not to work, and in the UK, a letter from HMRC and accountant stating having ceased trading and the register for self-employment. Big question, should I quit before I get my visa? Okay, so, and this is unfortunately there is not a clear answer for this. Okay, it is recommended to do it, but if you plan not to do it, you have to be careful because some consulates are strict and potentially consider going with a lawyer as well. Okay, we're going to talk more after the next slide. Is renting out a property considered a job? Size matters. If you only have 1 or 2 properties and you rent long term, it is considered passive income. But if you have 30 properties on Airbnb and you don't have a property manager appointed, it could be considered to be an active income. So be careful. In that case, you would appoint a property manager just to make sure that you are not being part of the operations. Okay. And what happens in between? Well, you have to basically prove that it is a passive income that you're obtaining. Is investing in stocks considered active income? No. Can I volunteer while on an NLV? Yes, but make sure never get paid. Okay, you can volunteer, and I recommend you volunteering because you will join a community, learn more Spanish, help others. It will make you happier to volunteer and help others, but always make sure not to get paid in order to not have any issues. Okay, but I never heard of anyone volunteering in Spain under a non-lucrative visa and having any issues at all. On the contrary. Talking about still working at the time of application, and here I will quote Spanguru's community members. One says, a P45 is in one way, but so is a letter from your employer stating you have resigned and will leave on a certain date. You're promising to leave, okay? But many people have said that they were still required to obtain a P45. And Pauline here said, it looks like a bit of a potluck if they accept the letter from HR department instead of a P45 if working up to the last minute. So this is the situation in the UK. And many people always asking about this and not receiving clear answers. Okay, it seems that BLS in the UK is quite strict about obtaining your P45 and submitting it to make sure that you're not going to be working. But in the US, they're much more friendlier to this situation, and they actually include in their requirements the possibility to work until the very last moment. And as Ali says here, for example, the Los Angeles Consulate and now BLS office will accept a notarized letter of intent that states your plan on quitting upon obtaining the visa before leaving to Spain. And the DC Consulate also mentions like, if you state and you promise that you will end your job at a certain date and or with the condition of obtaining the visa, they will be okay with it. Now, just to mention how strict some consulates can be with the possibility of you working, okay? This is the case of a Venezuelan national applying for a non-lucrative visa at the Buenos Aires consulate in Argentina who was denied their visa because this person showed activity in their LinkedIn profile, okay? This person wasn't happy with that decision, went to court in Madrid, and the court said that the consulate was right to deny this visa. Okay, so if you're showing activity in your LinkedIn profile, don't have it. Okay, and also make sure that not creating any doubt to the consulate that you are working, let's say, or plan to work in the future, etc. It was not possible for me to check what kind of activity this person had, but basically, this gives you a hint on how consulates think about the possibility of working. Once your visa is granted, as we said, it's a gray area. And for the renewals, of course, you won't be able to use your active income of any remote work, okay? Obviously, right? Of course, I don't recommend you to work remotely under a non-lucrative visa. For that is the digital nomad visa. Now, marriage, birth certificates, non-married couples. If you plan to go with your spouse, you will need a valid and updated certificate, marriage certificate, that usually, unless stated otherwise, has a 6-month validity. Children will also need their birth certificates. And if they were born or you were married in different jurisdictions like Trinidad and Tobago, Cyprus, South Africa, Russia, I heard, be careful because you need to obtain original copies of those certificates from those countries, and you will need to apostille them in those countries' authorities. So plan accordingly, plan ahead, because it usually takes a long time to obtain those documents. So be careful. Sometimes the police checks are not the most difficult ones to obtain. And if they are not in Spanish, you will also need to sworn translate it. Frequently asked question, what about adult children and ascendants? You can bring adult children, that is your children who are older than 18 years old without any limits, as long as they're part of the same family. So you have to prove that they are single, not married, and that they're financially dependent on you, and also for parents. But it's difficult to bring parents, but it is possible to bring your parents as well. Always check the official requirements if you're in this situation. We have mentioned sworn translators, and there's also some misconceptions about this type of translator. Very important. Sworn translators are accredited by the Spanish Ministry of Foreign Affairs and no one else. They pass a very difficult exam to become certified. Each sworn translator has a unique registration number, and their translations are accepted by all Spanish institutions, including consulates and, of course, BLS offices. Those translations are done remotely and signed with a legally valid e-signature, so you won't need to send or receive any physical email. Okay, you may choose to receive your physical documents or the physical translations, but you don't have to submit those for your non-lucrative visa application. You can submit the prints of the digitally signed documents by the sworn translators. Can I use any translator from the American Translator Association? I publish this because in LA and in Miami, I have seen links to this association, or at least mention to it, but this association has nothing to do with a Spanish sworn translators. Okay, it could be that a Spanish sworn translator is also a member of this association, but definitely if you're a member of this association, it doesn't make you a sworn translator. You need to be accredited by the Spanish Ministry of Foreign Affairs. In fact, in Miami, I recently saw that they took away the link, but they still mention this association, but it is misleading. Can sworn translators work with several language pairs? No, they can only do one language pair. For example, English, Spanish, Spanish, English. Okay. How much do sworn translations cost? Usually for the documents for this visa, it's about 40 euros per page, depending on urgency and complexity about it. Could be cheaper, could be a bit more expensive. What comes first? Apostille, then sworn translation. So lawyers will tell you, first you obtain the original document, you send it for apostille, and once you receive the apostille, you sworn translate the original document and the apostille itself. A lot of people choose not to translate the apostille, especially if the apostille, which is not always the same, comes also in Spanish. But there has been denials and friction sometimes because the apostille itself wasn't translated, even if it also was in Spanish, because the text contained in Spanish in the apostille, it is not a full copy of what it is contained in the original document. Okay, so this is to be in the safest side. If you want to save some money, but truth be told, you are taking a little risk. A lot of people, they obtain the original document, they send it for apostille. Before doing that, they scan it, they send the scanned version to a sworn translator. Sworn translate only the original document, and then they attach the apostille without any translation of the apostille. And they submit this, and usually there is no problems. But if the official review in your case has had, unfortunately, a bad morning, could be that this person says, you need to translate also, sworn translate your apostille, and they will only give you 10 days to provide this. And again, going back to what Spainguru can do for you for free. You can watch Spainguru's videos. I have many frequently asked questions answered by lawyers like Ainhoa Manero, Sofia Mijail, who give their answers from a legal perspective. Watch those videos. It is absolutely free and will give you more information. And just to remind people who join this webinar later on, there's a Q&A session at the end. You can ask any question related to the non-lucrative visa in the chat box at the bottom right corner of your screen. Make sure to add a question mark at the end so it's easy for me to see that you ask something. And if you're going to leave earlier and you think still that the information I provided today to you, you can leave a nice review on Trustpilot. That would really help me a lot and make me extremely happy. Thank you so much. Now let's continue and go through during the application, the timing of your application, and other things. The process. All family members must apply. In-person application, usually, especially if you work with BLS, usually an in-person requirement is required for an appointment in person at the BLS office in your city or at your consulate. And sometimes also the pickup of your passport, but sometimes you would just pay for an envelope and they will send you your passport to your to the address that you put. Some consulates only work by mail. This was the case of San Francisco, not anymore, but for example, Panama consulate is only by mail. Some consulates use a combination, by mail or not, or they give you the option. This used to be the case of Houston. Now it seems to be only in person. The non-lucrative visa will grant you a 90-day window to enter Spain. Important consideration. We'll see that better later. And some common mistakes to avoid: not checking the specific consulate or BLS office requirements in English, in Spanish too. There could be differences, so it's always good to check them all and several times. There was someone in the Spanguru community saying that this person checked several times in different parts of the process, and he always found something new and different who he didn't see. So be careful with that. Wrong or expired documents. Okay, some documents have a validity period. Some documents require a federal apostille, and maybe you obtain a state apostille. Wrong chronology, starting with the easy stuff at the beginning and ending with the difficult part. Wrong health insurance, as we said. Maybe reimbursement clauses. Maybe has co-payments. Maybe it's an American company with all these clauses and or cannot provide a certificate of coverage with the right wording. Say that you plan to work or not enough proof that you're not going to be working. Or you don't convince the officer enough that you're not going to be working, especially if you are young, which I'm sure you are, but you understand me. I have an interview for the New York City consulate for a couple in their 30s who took a sabbatical year and got initially denied because the husband didn't prove or convince enough that was not going to work once the non-lucrative visa was granted. So also be careful with that. Timing. These are ballpark figures, but so you understand, decision phase and starting to plan and gather documents usually will take the whole thing 6 months until you get your visa and your passport. In the UK, maybe a bit less. Most consulates retain passports during the processing. US applicants can potentially get a second passport. You have your process for that, and it's not that difficult. And many people get a second passport if they plan to travel while their visas are being processed. But in the UK, BLS may potentially allow applicants who make their case why they would need to keep their passports, but not always with luck, unfortunately. And it's not so easy. It is not easy at all to get a second passport in the UK because it is a clear list of conditions to obtain a second passport, and obtaining a Spanish visa is not one of them. And as we said, many BLS offices and consulates will give you the option to leave prepaid envelopes, but to receive your passport with your visas once they're granted. But many of them will require in-person visits just to pick up your passport, where all the family members have to go. For example, Miami. How long does the process take? Documents preparation, 2 to 3 months. Attending the appointment on the 3rd month. Wait for approval, average 2 months, but officially there is a maximum of 90 days. Then if they require extra documentation, they will give you a 10-day period to provide it. You can choose a visa start date in a 90-day window. When you submit your paperwork, you can choose when you intend to enter Spain, right? And that date of intent of entering Spain has to be within 90 days of your submission of your paper. Okay, this is what I read, but I couldn't find an official rule that states this. Okay, but basically many people mention this. You cannot apply, for example, today, 7 May 2025, to enter Spain on the 7th of May of 2026. You cannot. There is a limit in the future in which you set your intended date to enter Spain, considering that the visa processing can take officially up to 90 days. Now, if you select an intended date to enter Spain earlier than your visa is granted, the consulate will choose a date in the future. Now, officially, once you enter Spain, you will have 30 days to obtain your TA card or your residency card in Spain at the police station or foreign office. That will be valid for 1 year. Now, someone mentioned a little problem they had with the timing. You can ask for the visa to be valid for up to 3 months in advance. However, the difficulty I found was finding a health insurance company who will work that far out, as most only do 2. And I've heard recently that actually they only do 1. Okay. Solution: if you use Spanguru's recommended exclusive agent, he can delay the visa start date in the future for several months if needed. Okay. Now, we're going to go through 3 visual slides on how the process looks, with a new slide that I introduced today that I think it will be much clearer. Okay. Imagine this. You go to the appointment on date A, which is submission date, right? And when you submit your paperwork, you have to say when you want to enter Spain. You can choose that date of entering Spain up to 90 days from the submission date, right? And let's say that you choose the date B in red, okay? The consulate grants your visa before the B date and grants you your wish to start the visa on date B. As we said, the visa start date gives you 90 days to enter Spain, right? And you decide really to start on letter C. To fly to Spain on letter C, which is before the 3rd month ends of your visa validity period, right? Once you enter Spain on that date and you get a Spanish authority stamp in your passport, you have officially 30 days to obtain your residency card at a police station or foreign office. But in practice, it never works like that. It's impossible to get appointments so quickly. But something that you have to keep in mind, you need to obtain your residency card because your visa validity expires after 90 days. Okay, and you need to obtain the residency card. Now, once you obtain your residency card, you will have officially the start date of your residence, which should be the same date in which you enter Spain. Okay, not when you obtain the residency card. So 1 year after the start date of your residency card, you have to renew your residence, which you can do starting from 60 days before the expiration date and up to 90 days grace period after the expiration date. So it's recommended to do it, the renewal of your residency 60 days before your expiration date. Okay, and you do it online. It is not that difficult. You will need a digital signature, etc., etc. We're going to go through that. Now, this is another way to see how the application process works. And it is a very linear and sequential expression of the process, but it doesn't have to be like that. Some things come maybe before, there's some overlapping, but just for visual purposes, this is how it would look. First, you find which is your consulate. Second, you check the official requirements. Third, you will start collecting your documents, and you start by the difficult ones with longest validity, which are the police checks, usually. Unless you married or had kids in different countries, that would take longer. Then you will obtain your medical certificate that has a 3-month validity. You will apostille and sworn translate whatever requires to be apostille and sworn translation. You will sort out your private health insurance, or if you're a UK pensionist, you could use your S1 instead. You will book the appointment, and sometimes booking the appointment takes a long time, and maybe you would have to start earlier than all this I said. With the BLS office, you will obtain the appointment and attend that appointment, and then you will submit your paperwork and you will wait for notification, okay? And once you obtain your visa, you will collect it or receive it and then travel to Spain within the visa validity period. Once you arrive to Spain, it is recommended to register your address at the city hall in Spain. This is called obtaining the padrón or empadronamiento, that it will be needed in the 95% of cases to request your residency card or the card at the police station, which is your residency card. Hope this was clear. And this is the new slide. I'm sorry, but I'm so proud of this slide because, you know, I'm into operations and I love projects. And yes, I think this adds a more clear picture on how it would look. So the way you work for projects is you start with your objective and you work backwards, right? So it would be your intended date to arrive to Spain, what it needs to be done before that in order to hit that milestone. So if you can see, the first thing, police check. If you plan to arrive at the earliest in September, you will start to get your documentation as early as February, in my opinion. The police check, potentially marriage certificate, birth certificate, you will get it, and those will have a validity period of 6 months. You can see in the red dotted line the appointment date. So the documentation needs to be valid when the appointment date happens. Not all the documentation has a validity period, but those 3 ones and the medical certificates have it. Okay. Then the apostilles, you will apostille and sworn translate those certificates. You will get your financial documents in April. You will get your medical certificates also in April with a validity period of 3 months. Potentially, you have to apostille if in the UK. Well, in the UK for sure. Sworn translated if only in English. Health insurance just before the appointment. And then getting the appointment usually is taking about 2 months. People are all going online for about 2 months to obtain the appointment in the right date. And then once you get your appointment, there is a processing period. Could be 5 working days. It could be 90 days or longer. Nobody knows. There is no rule for that, depending on how the workload is. And then if they grant you the date you wanted, that's when your visa start date will be printed on your visa and will start a window of 90 days in which you can enter Spain, and you should, in order to validate your visa and so on. I hope this slide, that took me a while to make it clear, and I added my picture there with a thumbs up, because if you decide to print this slide, I want you to be there, always wishing you luck in your process. Now, timing to avoid capital gains tax. We're going back to taxes because a lot of people plan to sell their homes, and you could be potentially liable for CGT in Spain. Now, the best way to avoid this is timing your sale and the time in which you move to Spain. The best way is to sell in a different year in which you become a tax resident in Spain. Of course, there are allowances and mitigation conditions if you reinvest the money into buying property in Spain, or if you're older than 65 and so on. But the best is to time your sale and moving to Spain in order to avoid it altogether. And the best way to do it, there's 2 ways. You sell in 2025 and you move to Spain in 2026, and then you are sure that you avoid it, that you avoid being a tax resident during the same year in which you sold your property. But if there's no other option, if you sell at the beginning of the year or later on, try not to become that very same calendar year a tax resident in Spain. Okay, for that, make sure to spend less than 183 days in Spain. 2nd of July, there's only 182 days left in the year. Make sure you haven't been a single minute in Spain physically that very same year, because then if you become a tax resident in Spain and you sold in March and you become a tax resident later on, it will cover any taxable event from January 1st that same year, and you could be liable to pay CGT in Spain. I have tons of articles and videos about this. I highly recommend you reading them and watching them if you have time, and it's of course absolutely free to do so. And finally, we go after the approval. Once you get your visa, that I'm sure you're gonna get, there's 2 ways to enter Spain, either from outside Schengen or from inside Schengen. For example, if you fly from New York or London directly to Madrid, you will get a stamp from the Spanish authorities on your visa stating the date in which you entered, and if it's within the visa validity period, that is the best you can do. Sometimes you will fly from New York to Frankfurt, for example, and then you fly to Barcelona, but you got your stamp in Germany or in France and not in Spain. In that case, you have to get a declaración de entrada, which is a paper that you can obtain in the nearest police station, and it has to be done within 72 hours of your arrival, and the police says this person entered on this certain date. And it is very important that you get this because it will clear any doubts, and it's an official document that you will need to present when you get your TIE card. Okay? If you're planning to drive from the UK, you have to get your declaración de entrada once you cross from France. All right? So, if you plan to enter as a tourist before your visa validity date, you could do it, but it could bring some unwanted consequences. The worst that can happen, and it happens, the police officer tells you, go back out of the Schengen area and come back and get your stamp on your passport. Otherwise, they won't issue your TA card at that specific police station. Okay, that has happened. So try to enter or do it within the visa validity window. Get a Spanish SIM card once you enter. It's a recommendation to get SMS from Spanish authorities. Open a non-resident bank account. It will take you months potentially to obtain your TA card to become a official resident in Spain. Therefore, you will need to pay your rent, utilities, gym, etc. And you will need a Spanish IBAN to do so. And as I said, try to obtain an empadronamiento or padrón, which is the registration at the town hall of the city where you're living. That has a validity period of 3 months. So it has to be valid once you go to the TA card appointment, to the fingerprints appointment at the police. And it will be required in the 95% of cases, but not always, as we're going to read later on, depending on the police station where you go and the officer in front of you, and if this officer has had a good morning or not. And as I said, there's officially 30 days to obtain the TA card, but it almost never happens like that. Frequently asked question, is the empadronamiento strictly necessary to obtain the TA? There are no appointments to obtain the TA. What should I do? And here I'm going to quote a lawyer who said that in practice, it is not really required within 1 month, and actually obtaining appointments can take up to 6 months without issue. Everybody knows there are no appointments. It's a huge bottleneck in Spain, and it has been like that for years, and I don't think it will change. Of course, the sooner the better you obtain the appointment, the better, but there's no immediate rush. And you can try to get appointments in the same province, okay, with different police stations. So you have to check that. And for the empadronamiento, it is not officially required. You have to prove your address, and the empadronamiento is the best proof of address, but not the only one. And big police stations know this, and this lawyer has used Airbnb receipts. Or, for example, I know for a fact here in Malaga, if you show your rental contract, that is enough, because they know that even obtaining the empadronamiento the first day you arrive to Malaga, it will take a couple of months to obtain the empadronamiento. So all these delays, big police stations know it. But if you go to a small police station, because there are no appointments in the big ones, that's when you find a lot of requirements and interpretations that actually are not really written anywhere. Now, let's talk about the renewal process, how and when to renew your NLV. So you have 1 year to renew, and then you're going to do 2 renewals for 2 years each, so total 5 years. And the renewal has to be within 60 days before the expiration of your T card, and up to 90 days after expiration. It's called the grace period. You will have to show financial requirements for renewals. If the financial requirements are proved by savings, yes, you will have to show double the amount of the APRM percentages. But if you're receiving passive income, you will have to calculate how much passive income you will receive in 2 years, right? Or you have to do a calculation of a combination of those two. Now, the funds need to be available in the account when renewing. And the second renewal will be for years 4 and 5, and it will be basically the same as year 2 and 3. And after 5 years in Spain, you can obtain the long-term residence, also known as the permanent residence, which is much better than having to renew the non-lucrative visa. Now, some changes effective on May 20th, 2025, that is in 13 days. Renewal periods remain at 2 years. There were rumors that it was going to be 4 years, but it remained 2 years each renewal period. And now they added a 183-day stay requirement. Visa holders are required to spend at least 183 days per year in Spain to qualify for renewal. And this aligns with Spanish tax residency rules, meaning applicants would become tax residents if they stay physically in Spain more than 183 days in a certain calendar year. But now, here's the incredibly big catch. There is big legal ambiguity about this 193-day requirement that was passed under the regulation on the November 19th, 2024, effective on May 20th. The 183-day rule is currently only included in a bylaw in the regulation of the main organic law, which is higher in hierarchy, legal hierarchy, the regulation of the law is always lower, okay, and requires less procedures to update it. Changing the main law requires much more agreement in the Congress in Spain, okay. That is why they change the regulations many times, but the law doesn't change often, okay. This is called the Reglamento de Extranjería, which is the regulation of the law. But there is a Supreme Court ruling that indicates that establishing a minimum stay requirements for any temporary visa must be included in the main law, in the organic law, in order to be fully enforceable. So even if the Congress says, and they pass 100 new reglamentos de extranjería, and they add their minimum stay requirements, the Supreme Court says that legally this is not enforceable because this minimum stay requirement goes against a very basic right of movement, which is sustained also by European law, cannot be included in a regulation. Okay, so the Congress, the Supreme Court says the Congress can do whatever you want. You can add any requirements out there, but it's not going to be enforceable. Okay, so right now, what happened until May 20th, the current regulation has a minimum stay of 180 days, but the Supreme Court ruling, according to this, they had to delete it. And there is no minimum stay requirement, and many NLV holders are renewing, staying less than 180 days without any problems, okay? So the opinion, and I'm here quoting Ainhoa Manero, expert immigration lawyer, recommended by me in Spainguru, is that the new requirement of 193 days of the new reglamento is not going to be enforceable. Same story as the current one, because nothing has changed. Only the number has changed, okay? So this is the situation I've been asked also this week, and I am addressing it now very clearly. I have content about this on YouTube. If you send me an email, I can send you all the links you need, okay? And of course, if you plan to stay less than this period, I personally would always be sure to consult with a legal advisor who knows their job. Such is the case of the lawyers that I recommend, because if you don't plan to become a Spanish tax resident in Spain and still you want to come here on the non-lucrative visa, with the new regulations, there is an option because of everything that I just said. This is not legal advice from what I said. I'm just quoting immigration lawyers that I have, let's say, on YouTube. You can hear their words directly from their mouths, let's say, directly without any intermediaries like me. But this is the situation, and I want you to know it because you could have much more flexibility by knowing it. Okay. Now, renewal process case study. Imagine that you are a couple, you need to renew 36,000 euros as per APREM 2025 for two people, main applicant and dependent. Imagine one of the applicants has a pension of 15,000 euros annually. That means that in 2 euros, this person will get 30,000 euros, and it counts as 30,000 for the funding requirement of a renewal. Now, they still need to bring 42,000 more to the table. You can supply additional savings, for example, or other sorts of passive income, okay? Now, be careful. What about rental income? It is not widely accepted because many authorities consider rental income to be unsafe. The tenants could stop paying you anytime. It is not the same as receiving a pension, which is an acquired right. So, careful with using rental income. Many people use it, many people are accepted, but also there are people who are not accepted. So use it if you can as an, let's say, extraordinary or complementary type of passive income to prove your funding. Now, documentation requirements for renewal: ongoing private medical insurance coverage, which can be public healthcare system coverage if you have access. But don't count on using the public healthcare system access on the first renewal, because if you plan to using the convenio especial, it takes several weeks or months to have access. And usually if you're moving from private health insurance to convenio especial, you will not be able to use it for the first renewal, and they will have to overlap. And make sure not to have any gap in NLV compliant coverage, okay? Make sure, because that is one of the top reasons for renewal denial. Widely discussed in the Spanguru non-lucrative visa Facebook group. You will have to show updated passport copies for both individuals, ongoing health coverage with, and no police records, also another one. Imagine you're driving under the influence in Spain, you get a police record under your non-lucrative visa. You go to the renewal, they see this, could be a denial. This happens quite a lot. Local town hall registration, that is the certificado de empadronamiento, it is usually a requirement depending on the region as well. Now, the time you need to spend in Spain to maintain your residence, obtain long-term residence, and or citizenship in Spain. For the renewal, there are renewals being in Spain less than 6 months, 180 days, as we said. And now you will need, according to the new regulation, to be spending 183 days in Spain minimum per calendar year, which will make you a tax resident in Spain. But as we say, there is a legal ambiguity because of Supreme Court ruling that says that it is not enforceable. This is the situation. Long-term residence. If you plan to obtain your long-term residence after 5 years of residence in Spain, you cannot be outside of Spain more than 10 months in the previous 5 years to obtain it. If you didn't comply with these requirements, potentially you could renew for a third period of 2 years, which is called extraordinary renewal, a third renewal. But some regions don't allow it, such as the case of Galicia. Okay, sorry for that. And then nationality. If you plan to obtain your Spanish nationality or passport, when you apply for the Spanish passport, if you are a holder of a temporary residence in Spain, you cannot be outside of Spain more than 3 months per year. This is the typical case of people who have Ibero-American dual citizenship who benefit from the 2-year residence in order to apply for the Spanish passport. But if you're a holder of long-term residence, you cannot be outside of the EU more than 1 year or 12 months consecutively, or no more than 30 months in 5 years. Okay. And again, talking about the Supreme Court ruling that deleted the minimum stay requirement in the current regulation, you can see that the letter E of Article 162 is deleted. It says anulado, which means deleted. Okay. So what expert immigration lawyers say is that the minimum stay requirements for the new reglamento will go the same path. It will not be enforceable. Okay. And here you can see much more information that you can read through with all the links you need for the official papers and publications about this matter. Now, if you plan to transition to work permit after 1 year, there's many pathways to do so. And you could potentially even obtain a work permit even before the non-lucrative visa from a Spanish consulate if you have the conditions. But it is easier, everyone says, to enter Spain under a non-lucrative residence. And after 1 year, it is easier to obtain a work permit. And you have several pathways, as I say. I'm mentioning the most common 3. First is cuenta propia. If you have your own project, you need to present a business plan, has to be approved, have some money in the bank, and potentially they will grant you the work permit to work as for your own project. Okay. I recently started offering consultations by Spanguru's co-founder, Cristina Samson. You can find it on spanguru.es consultations menu. She is one person who submitted a business plan and was accepted and modified her student visa for a work visa. Okay, and you can consult with her, for example. Now, you can also work as an employee in cuenta ajena. Okay, if you receive a job offer or receive a sponsorship from a company. Okay, and many people tell me, Bruno, make sure to make people understand that this is not automatic, because people will think that this is easy. I'm not saying it's easy. I'm just stating that this is a possibility and a lot of people have done it. My wife has done it. Cristina Samson has done it. Okay, depends on your business plan. It depends on what kind of sponsorship you receive, how employable you are. Okay, the authorities need to see that this is something real. Okay, and you comply with conditions. And definitely it is doable, definitely. But for some people, it will not be easy. Okay, and it is definitely not automatic. Some people would think maybe that after 1 year, you get your work permit granted. No, it's not like that. Okay, you need to go through those processes. And now you can potentially, if you're working remotely, under the non-lucrative visa, as we said, it's a gray area. A lot of people do it. You could potentially choose to transition to a digital nomad visa, and this is happening. And the immigration authorities are accepting the fact that you are working as a digital nomad with a non-lucrative visa, and they are accepting these transitions, of course, if you comply with the requirements, without any problems. Now, pathway to Spanish citizenship after living in Spain. So as a residence, okay, in terms of residence, how long do you have to spend in Spain as a legal resident in order to apply for a Spanish passport? So if you're a passport holder of any of the countries in red, Ibero-American countries, Brazil, Andorra, Portugal, Philippines, Guinea Equatorial in Africa, you can apply as fast as 2 years only of legal residence. So if you, for example, are American, but you have the Mexican passport because one of your parents is Mexican, you are Mexican by origin, as per the Article 30 of the Mexican Constitution. You have to be a passport holder by origin to benefit from the 2-year fast track. You cannot naturalize like you don't have any ties to Mexico, you go to Mexico, you spend certain time and they give you the passport in Mexico, but you haven't had blood ties, you are not by origin and you will not benefit from the 2-year fast track. Okay, so have to be by origin to benefit from the 2-year fast track. Otherwise, most of countries there in gray will have to wait 10 years as legal residents to be able to apply for Spanish citizenship. There are other ways. For example, if you're married to a Spaniard, after 1 year of legal residence, you could apply for Spanish citizenship too. And again, if you weren't here at the beginning, you can use Spainguru for free, have the newsletter, YouTube channel, the community, and so many more things. Okay, so many more resources. But you also can find our vetted partners that I have personally vetted over the years, and you're in very good hands. Not because I say it, because the reviews are pretty outstanding. And here's a bonus. And this weekend, actually, I published a video about asking people if you use help for your non-lucrative visa. 130 votes, half of them said yes, half of them no. And I also asked for the people who use professional help. Do you think it was worth the investment? Roughly 77% of people said yes, and 23% of people said it wasn't a good investment. This is not about Spanguru's partners. I haven't asked if they use any of my recommendations. Just in general, do you think it was a good investment to go with lawyers or paralegals? And I would say that the wide majority, are happy because it reduces stress and it makes things more organized. Now, let's stay in touch. Before going to the Q&A session, you can always reach out to me at hello@spanguru.es. I always answer my emails. Join my Spanguru Facebook group. For the non-lucrative visa, is the biggest one out there with 20,000 members. YouTube channel, 1 video per working day. And join my newsletter that I send every single Monday. All of these services are free, and you can opt out anytime if you get tired of them. Remember, the content of this webinar is for information purposes only and is not legal advice. The requirements listed here are not official. Check your specific consulate requirements and BLS offices. And now, yes, we're going to move to the Q&A session. And if you haven't done so, and you have to leave for some reason, make sure, please, to leave a Trustpilot review if you think the information that I shared today is helpful. You can do it by going on the bar on the top, the green bar with the red button. And now we're going to go to the questions. Apparently, I have 8 questions here. And again, thank you everyone for joining today and asking questions. Hi, Chris. Thank you for asking. Does it matter if we start the renewal process in the 60 days prior to the expiration of our current NOV or during the 90 days grace period? I'm telling you that I have received the feedback that it's much better to do it on the 60 days prior to the expiration. Right now, I cannot tell you from the back of my head why, but apparently it is worse. It is worse to do it after the tarjeta will expire. You can still do it, but it's not recommended for some reasons that now I cannot recall. But please join the Spainguru Facebook group and ask for people who have renewed under the grace period, as they call it, the 90-day period after the expiration, and what sort of problems or frictions they faced. Now, let's go with the next one. Emily, thank you for joining today and asking a question. What changes when you get the permanent residency after 5 years? So, many things. First of all, you can work. Very important. Second of all, you don't have to renew it every 2 years. I think it's every 5 years. Then you can also be outside of Spain much longer. I think no more. You can be up to 12 months consecutively, as we mentioned. But even if you go longer, it is much easier to recuperate or get back your long-term residence. Okay. And something that you also can do it from Spain. And also obtaining your long-term residence, you do it from Spain. You don't have to go to a consulate, right? So there's several changes and advantages, I would say, in obtaining the long-term residence, officially, not permanent. So yeah, it's almost like becoming Spanish, almost. And actually I have content about people who ask like, should I get the Spanish passport if I'm a long-term resident? What are the advantages? To be honest, there's not too many. I'm not saying the few advantages that it has to be Spaniard, but there's also some disadvantages. But being long-term resident is absolutely great and very, very comparable to having a Spanish passport in terms of your day-to-day life in Spain. Now, Michael Furtado, thank you for joining today. Michael, does permanent resident provide a path to Spanish citizenship? Actually, any type of residency, legal residency counts towards the requirement of Spanish citizenship. Student visa, for example, is not a residency. Student visa is a permiso de estancia, and it doesn't count towards Spanish citizenship because it's not a residency type. It counts half the time for the long-term residency. So make sure not to think that coming here to Spain as a student visa holder will count towards your citizenship. But if you obtain your non-lucrative visa or digital nomad visa or work permit, those count towards your period of time required for your Spanish citizenship. Okay, so permanent residence or long-term resident holder also definitely counts towards your residency required time. That will depend on the passport that you hold at the moment. If you are American, it will take you 10 years. But if you are dual citizen, because I read Michael Furtado seems to be a Portuguese name, Hurtado in Spanish with H. Potentially, if you have the dual citizenship with Portugal benefits from the 2-year fast track. So if you can obtain the Portuguese passport, potentially you could become Spanish in 2 years. But of course, if you have Portuguese passport, you have already a European Union passport, and all this would, of course, will have to be rethought, because maybe it's not that interesting for you to obtain another EU passport, such as the Spanish one. So long story short, hopefully that answered your question. Now, let's go with a NIE is issued with the NLV. Yes, correct. You get your NIE number on your non-lucrative visa. There's also a process to obtain the NIE before from a consulate if you want. It costs about $10 to do it, and not too long. And you have to state a reason. For example, it could be like purchasing a property in Spain, because in order to purchase a property in Spain, you need a NIE number. So even if you don't plan to move to Spain, but you say like, oh, look, I want to buy a property in Spain as a non-resident. I don't plan to move to Spain. And for that, I need a NIE. You pay $10, you wait your time, supply your paperwork, and you get a NIE even before applying the NLV. And then suppose that number shouldn't change, because that would be your foreign identification number forever in Spain until you become a Spanish citizen, in which case your NIE number will be deleted and you will obtain a Documento Nacional de Identidad. Emily, how many NLV applications are denied? How many? Like per year? Or what is the chance that they are denied? Can you specify that question? I don't know. In any case, I don't know, really. I don't know the answer to either of those questions. Many are denied, but I don't know the number or in which country or in which consulate. I can tell you that some consulates are easier than others. Panama is super easy. Miami seems to be extremely helpful and very responsive. So it is much easier to obtain feedback from them before the submission of papers. So therefore, increasing the chances of getting accepted before submission. Some other consulates are very hard to communicate with. Therefore, you need to be extremely prepared. All right, let's go with the next one. Mark Karsten. If my husband is a dual citizen with Germany, will this allow me as his spouse to have the same benefits for easier process to live in Spain, or do I have to go through all the steps as a US citizen? If your husband is German, you are in good luck. That's perfect. As an EU passport holder, can move to Spain, and you can be a familiar of a European citizen, relative of a EU family card. You obtain that, and that's it. Of course, you have to fulfill with the requirements, but it's so much easier than the non-lucrative visa. So I'm sorry to answer you after an hour and 40 minutes. It was in my third slide, though, that I said, if you are a spouse of an EU passport holder, this visa and obviously this webinar is not for you. But I am very happy for you that you don't have to go through this. It will be much easier. Emily, what if your former job refuses to provide a notarized letter that you are not working for them anymore? I don't know. That's a very technical question. I guess you're applying from a US consulate. Maybe you can get in contact with your consulate, and potentially you could do a sworn statement that is notarized and sworn translated, stating the situation and providing proof that that this is the situation and that you're not working, etc., etc. And you have to make a strong case. Mark, we're planning to move to Spain in 2026. We potentially may have two challenges that we may run into. Maybe you can help or direct us. One, in the US, we do not pay taxes when we sell a primary residence, our home, not a rental. We do not plan on selling our home until the 27-28. We'll be paid taxes on income for the sale in Spain. If you sell your home and you're a tax resident that same year in which you sell your home, you could be liable for CGT in Spain. So don't become a Spanish tax resident the same year in which you sell your home in the States. As I said, you don't pay taxes on the same thing twice, but Spanish taxes are higher. In this case, could be depending on how much income how much gain you're making from the sale, there is a progressive tax rate that until 30% in for big amounts of difference or gains of taxes in Spain. Okay, so be careful with that. I showed you a couple of slides showing how you can avoid it, but basically don't become a tax resident in Spain the same year in which you sell. Second thing says, with health insurance, I think you mentioned that prescription medication are not covered. Is this with all carriers? Do you advise we call the insurance companies and ask how much it costs for our particular prescription medicine? As I said, yes, effectively, you would have to pay retail price. I understand that in the US, many health insurance companies will subsidize or will cover some of the cost of your medicines. It's not common here in Spain. There's a couple of policies or one only that will cover you up to 200 euros per year, which is not much. Otherwise, you have to pay retail price. Good news are, everyone says that many medicines are much cheaper than in the States. You can use a website called Vademecum, which requires free sign up, and you can check the prices of your medicines in advance. You have to do a little investigation. But yeah, basically, carriers or health insurance companies will not provide NLV compliant policies that cover the medicine costs. Okay, and once you move with, if you decide to using Convenio Especial to public healthcare system, you will not get also. You will have to pay retail price for your medicines. So yes, you definitely need to investigate and plan your costs accordingly and budget them in advance and everything else. I have videos about budgeting in Spain with 3 different scenarios. For rentals, for buying property, moving to different areas in Spain that you can use to inspire you to build a budget. Can you please put up the slide with Carlos' contact information? You go to Spanguru.es. Whoa, what did I do? What did I do here? Sorry for that. I will give you the link. Well, you go to Spanguru.es, services for Spanish visas, and then here's the link for Carlos Blanco. You fill the form and you get a quote. This is absolutely free, and there is no extra cost in using an exclusive agent. Okay, so you will not pay more than if you go directly to Apostilles. So it makes no, sorry, it's just, I'm not trying to sell you this. Like, it is free for you to use Carlos Blanco. Okay, he gets a commission, of course, and I also get a commission, definitely. But there is no extra cost. It will actually, the code will be exactly the same for you if you go directly to Apostilles as if you use the exclusive agent, who is an immigration expert and who knows and has done hundreds of non-lucrative visas, if not thousands. Okay, so definitely, if you plan to use Apostilles, it would be great that you use Carlos. Definitely. So, of course, there are many other great companies out there that provide you with compliant NLD policies like DKV, Sanitas, etc. Choose the one that is best for you. But if you choose Apostilles, definitely it's out there. The option to use something that is not at extra cost to you, and it will be great help. So we said the website for okay. Can you please type the website for checking the price? Spanguru medicine price. Okay, so medicines in Spain, insurance. So let me see. It's called vademecum.es, if I'm not wrong. Vademecum.es, I think. Yes. It's not great. I have a video about it. If you send me an email, I will send you the links, but it's not easy for me to get them quickly. And more questions. Let's see. So Carlos, can help with health insurance and also provide for a fee legal assistance. Yes, I actually also recommend Carlos as a lawyer, as an immigration lawyer, if you go to consultations, okay? But maybe he's not the one directly dealing with your NLV application. Maybe Sofia, that I have shown you an interview with her. She's a fantastic immigration lawyer who knows her job and has extensive experience with any of the consulates in the the English-speaking countries as well, right? So yeah, definitely. Checking price medication, I did by the becum.es. Have folks in poor health been denied all insurance? Yes, unfortunately, yes. In the end, they are private health insurance companies. So if you have pre-existing conditions that are severe, you could be denied. That happens. And let me see, to publish one more. I think this was the last question. I had to Sofia, and I have to go to Washington, D.C. Why that sad face, Mia? Okay. All right. So I think we made it till the end. If there are no more questions, this is being recorded. I will process the video. It's almost 2-hour video, and it takes some time for processing and downloading. But you will receive it in your emails. And as I said, if you think the information I provided today is helpful, please leave a review on Trustpilot. It really helps me and Spanguru and others find Spanguru out there. And yes, I stay in touch with you. Make sure to send me an email. Any questions you have, don't worry. Maybe I don't answer it right away. Maybe I answer it one day after. And I do my best to give you my impressions and at least point you in the right directions, or maybe just give you links for resources that you can use to get your answers. So yes, thank you so much for everyone who did their effort to be today in front of your computers to talk about the non-lucrative visa, and stay in touch. And I hope, and I will be hoping that you get your non-lucrative visa. Okay, take care and see you around. Bye-bye.